Someone recently asked me on the channel, what do you do when you publish your first book and you get your first review and it's like a 1 star or even a 3 star? I'm not sure which is worse, honestly, because a 1 star says polarizing, but that could be what somebody else likes about it. 3 star says, eh. So I don't know which one I dislike the most. But anything below a 4 star for your first review, it just sucks. And, you know, what do you do when that happens? Well, I am the perfect person to ask about this, as it turns out, because that same thing has happened to me. And me and reviews, we have not had the best relationship. All writers get bad reviews if you happen to get more than a few from your friends and family. But everyone will say, don't go to Goodreads. Goodreads is a dumpster fire. Don't look at your reviews. But I'll have other authors commiserate with me like, oh yeah, reviews, they're so awful. My reviews are so bad. And then I'll look at their Goodreads and their book has like a 4.7 average and mine has like a 3.8. And I'm like, that's not even bad. It's not bad at all. You got like 1 review that hurt your feelings and people are just tearing me apart. So let's talk about all of that. How to deal with these reviews. First, I should say that I started in traditional publishing. There was no indie publishing when I started my career. If you're new here, I have been a fantasy author since 2009. I started out in traditional young adult publishing. And at that point, I had to write multiple books. I had to rewrite my book multiple times, like completely tear it up and rewrite it. I had to go through over 100 agent queries. Then you get the agent and then they have to send it out to editors and find an editor who loves it so much that they want to spend a bunch of time with your book. And then they have to show it to the marketing department. The marketing department has to be on board before the editor who loves it is allowed to acquire it. Sometimes they have to show it to like the editor-in-chief of the imprint. A lot of people have to like your book before it gets published in traditional publishing. Therefore, you get the idea that your writing is good before it even sees a reader. If you've made it this far, you have deeply impressed multiple industry people before it's on the shelf. And I had books with 2 different publishers, so this happened to me twice that I had multiple editors interested in my book, and then the book comes out, it doesn't get very good reviews. Like, readers just are not into it. That is a different mindset than when you're doing it in indie, though, because you kind of know, like, you know how to write. There's no way you would have made it this far if your writing was terrible and your storytelling was terrible. It's more that your story just didn't really have mass appeal, or it didn't hit the marks of like where the trends are going or what people are into. It still hurts though. It sucks. It feels like you disappointed all the people that believed in you. But it doesn't necessarily say you're just a terrible writer and you're not ready for prime time. But nevertheless, I would read my reviews and I would try to see if there were patterns, if there were things that people consistently didn't like about my work that maybe I could improve in the future, and I kept trying to improve things. After 5 young adult books, I moved into indie publishing and I continued to get like a lot of not so great reviews. And then I started my pen name. And for the first time I was writing like really to market, and it was a pen name and I wasn't telling anyone I knew about it. So I had nobody to review my book, or like, I didn't even have anybody to beta read my book, to be honest with you. I just wrote it and edited it and then threw it out there. I don't think it's like a great work of the ages or anything, but I did have a lot of fun writing it, and I had my fingers crossed. And the first review that I got for it was a 3-star review. It said something along the lines of like, this is the author's first book and her work has merit, but there were a lot of typos and grammatical errors. It needs a lot of editing work, and, you know, just kind of, it's just saying like it was okay. So I did go in and I did another editing pass to try to clean up some of the typos. But at the same time, I had been binge reading a ton of popular, well-reviewed indie books, and a lot of them had typos. So I was I felt a little targeted, I'm not going to lie, because there were so many other books that had many typos that still had great reviews that I was like, of course this lady had to come in and complain about mine. But, you know, fair enough, there were typos, so I cleaned those up. I'm not sure about grammatical errors. I'm not sure if there's grammar that I am not aware of out there, maybe, and she's like a expert on the Chicago Manual of Style, or if her idea of grammar is incorrect, because I think the grammar was fairly solid, but I'm not saying I'm perfect. Some of it probably leaned more colloquial than like a copy editor would have certainly had things to say. But I'd worked with a lot of copy editors already, so I don't think the grammar was terrible. In the long run, that first book under my pen name, Beauty and the Goblin King, ended up being my most successful book ever, like by a lot. It had some major fans. So it was a good thing that I did not take that review to heart and totally freak out over it, because I ended up getting better reviews. The book wasn't necessarily bad, it just wasn't for everybody. I wrote some other series. I continued to get these, like my review average continued to be not great. Then I released The Fairer Hex. This was a book that was hitting a trend right at the right spot, and it was selling really, it was getting a lot of pre-orders right out of the gate. I could tell this was gonna be like my biggest book. And then the early reviews came in, and they were bad. Not just one this time, but like multiple. Betsy, come here, darling. But I got like multiple 1 to 3 star reviews, so that the average was like a 2.5, and it had like 5 reviews, which looks way worse than having 1 3-star review. Now it looks like this book just sucks. Even one of my regular readers who had loved my other books came in and gave it a bad review. So that was terrible. And in this case, I was looking at the reviews and I couldn't quite figure out like what was the consensus? What was wrong with this book? They weren't really indicating what the problem was, because people had different opinions of what was wrong with it, or just kind of a general, like, I wasn't into it. So I didn't really know how to fix it, anything that I could fix. I just had to like, The Fairer Hex ended up being my second most successful book of all time. And eventually the review averaged out and became just like all my other books. Totally normal. Still not the best, but not any worse than any of the others. It just had like a really unlucky start, that the people who read it first just happened to be a batch that didn't like it. And mind you, at this point, for quite a while, I'd been trying to read reviews and improve things about my writing that people didn't seem to like about it. Or just to change things to see if like I could hit upon something that people really seemed to love. Good morning. Disheveled Editing Lydia here. And I wanted to add to this and say that part of the reason I kept getting bad reviews might have actually been because I kept changing what I was doing in an attempt to find something that would please reviewers. I mean, that wasn't the only reason. I also just happened to like writing a lot of different things. But there's perhaps a cautionary tale here in that it might be better to just go with it, that you get some bad reviews, but if this is what you like doing, just stay in your lane and you will start to build up an audience of people who like what you do. And they will start to become more of your audience, and your reviews will start to improve. Betsy, come on, Betsy. So I had written young adult, I had written adult fantasy, I had written romance, I had written short books, long books, funny books, serious books, dark books. I had written many, many different kinds of books. Every sort of book that I think that I'm capable of writing at this point, I had tried to see if I would hit upon something that really people just loved from me. And it didn't matter what I wrote. My review average always ended up being like a 3.8 to like a 4.1, no matter what. Nothing mattered. So if you find yourself in this situation where you get a very bad review, especially on a new release, or you just don't get great reviews in general, let's talk a little bit about what to do about it. And I'm sorry if you can hear my cat screaming outside. She's fine. She was just in here. She just likes to do that. According to the internet, it might mean that she's going senile, and she is almost 18, so maybe. But she gets a lot of love. That's about all I can do. Okay, so let's, over the years I've realized there's certain reasons why you might get bad reviews. So let's consider what some common reasons are to get bad reviews. One reason, you have already written other things, but you are now working with a new genre or a new tone. You might get some bad reviews simply because people liked what you were doing before and they don't like what you're doing now. It doesn't mean that what you're doing is bad. It just means that you have changed and some people aren't happy about it. This happens, of course, anytime an artist changes what they're doing. And in this case, I would say you probably already thought about the ramifications of changing what you're doing, and you should probably just keep on doing it. The second reason you might get bad reviews is because you're trying something that is kind of fresh or different, or it doesn't really hit all the tropes. It's not quite what people expect. I think this is one of the reasons. Actually, I think I probably hit all these reasons, but I tend to be bad at really writing to trope. And I think this is one reason that I just don't get a very high review average, because people go in expecting X and then I give them a slightly tilted X. I don't quite give them a full Y, but I'm not executing the X correctly. So if what you write is not the tropiest, hottest kind of thing, you might get bad reviews because people were really hoping that they were going to get the hot trend, and yours is, it's just a little weird. In this case, of course, I don't think that you should change what you're doing unless you really need money. I've talked about that bluntly on this channel before, that sometimes you might want to try to change what you're doing just to make money, but as an artist, don't change a thing. The third reason you might get bad reviews is because you're pushing the envelope. You've written something that's like a little darker or smuttier or more violent, or it deals with somewhat controversial material or things that trigger people. There's a lot of different things that can just kind of set people off. It can even be hard to anticipate exactly what those things are. Hello, Disheveled Editing Lydia here once again. I was mainly thinking about like broad topics that are controversial, like sex or violence. But of course, there's also like more micro issues with like cultural appropriation, representation. Did you do your research? You know, how are you representing disabilities? All kinds of things like that. If you get a bad review along those lines, it is a little more worth considering whether you did enough research or talked to people. But that's like a whole other complicated topic. I think that has also affected my work sometimes, because sometimes I want to deal with heavier topics and I don't always really telegraph in my writing like, this is bad. I'll put the characters in their world and they have their thoughts, and sometimes those thoughts are a little problematic, or I have characters that need time to change, maybe over the course of multiple books. Not everybody likes that, and also I've written some dark romances sprinkled in with lighter romances, so that might have upset some people. And if you chose to do something that has any kind of upsetting, controversial, sexy material in it, and that's what you wanted to write, I would just say to expect some bad reviews for it. The fourth reason is that maybe you really just don't have enough experience as a writer. This can happen, particularly with indie publishing. A lot of people are publishing books before they're really ready to be a published author. It can be very hard to know when you're ready if you're not going through the gauntlet of traditional publishing. In that case, agents and editors are going to tell you, or rather they're going to send you form rejections that tell you that you are not ready. But when you're indie publishing, you might have a critique group, you might have some friends reading, you might have had a short story published in a smaller publication. You might not have like a really firm way of telling if you're ready to be published. And my best advice for this is to just take it seriously, put the work into it that you can. Know that being ready for publication usually does take years of work. So if you just started, you're probably not ready. But I think the biggest indicator is when you start to have people asking you for your book. Like you hand a chapter to a friend of yours who's like, I'll read your book, and then they actually read it in like a week and are like, are you going to write a sequel? If you get anyone who really becomes a fan of your work amongst your like beta reader group, that starts to give you an idea. Like, you can kind of just feel that moment where people start actually wanting to read what you write versus like, I enjoyed it because you're my friend. But yes, it's hard to tell because everybody kind of has different friends, and not everyone's friends have good taste. Not everyone's critique groups have good taste. It's not always easy to know. So if you get bad reviews and you're kind of a newish author who hasn't really had like a real proof moment, you may want to consider, was this book not ready? Especially if you didn't ever go through like any kind of like painful critique process. You truly might not be ready, because most people do have to at some point. And then the fifth reason could be that you do have experience, but this book is just not great. Everyone's going to have some duds. Not every book is good. If you think about your favorite author in the world who's written, 10 or more books, chances are that author has some books in their catalog where you're like, don't even bother reading that one. If you're like recommending them, you're like, read this one, but never read this one. If you start to feel like this might be the case, I'm just kind of inclined to leave it alone. If it's not important, like it's just a standalone and you don't even really like it, you could unpublish it and try to rework it, or just like burn it and forget it existed. I find that there's just certain books in my catalog that I had the idea, I started writing them, I was telling everyone I was writing them, I finished them, but they just never entirely gelled, and I don't think they ever would. Some books just don't fully cooperate. I don't think they're terrible. If you like my work, they still have some fans, but some books they just don't really quite work. It's up to you whether you want to keep those in your catalog or not, at least if you're indie published. Over time, I came to realize like that's going to happen sometimes, and sometimes you just got to let that go. So in general, you have to consider, what are the reasons why this book might be getting bad reviews, and is it worth doing something about it? Do you feel like, I love this book, I have something I wanted to say, or do you feel a little uncertain, like, I wasn't sure if that was really ready, but I published it anyway, or I don't really love it either. If there's some doubt in your mind, or you think that you might be able to improve it, then you might want to pull it and rework it. Or maybe you get a review that points out things where you're like, oh my gosh, they're so right. I wish I had done those things. Especially if you're early on, there's no shame in pulling a book, reworking it, re-releasing it, and taking that as an opportunity to improve. However, it is also possible that the book is perfectly good. It's just not a book for everybody. Your great reviews might be right around the corner, like me with Fairer Hacks. Or maybe you just have a quirky story to tell. Not everyone's going to like it. It's also possible that you're a beginner, but you don't really know how to improve it yet, and just keep writing might be the best thing to do. And then in a year or two, you're going to look back at that first book, and then you're going to go, oh no, I got to pull that book. That was terrible. Maybe you rework it, maybe you don't, but sometimes it takes time to really realize how bad you started off. If you are confident, reasonably confident in your book, and you don't want to pull it, you don't want to rework it, then I would just say, try to relax. Just try to own that this is your art, this is what you do. Not everyone's going to like it. All that time that I spent reading reviews and trying to write different things that people might like more, trying to like, oh, they don't like my pacing. Maybe I need to slow down my pacing. Maybe I need to speed up my pacing. They don't like my main characters. I need to write a stronger main character. I need to write this. I need to write that. No matter what I tried, people always had something else they didn't like about it. Or sometimes it's the same thing they didn't like the first time that I thought that I had fixed. So that just felt like kind of a waste of time. So yeah, just try to relax. And then my third tip is, as soon as you publish your first book and you have any fans at all, try to build a review team, because those people will be your buffer against those bad reviews in the future. With your first book, you can try to have some early fans, some friends or something to leave good reviews. In some cases, if Amazon doesn't ban them for being your friend or whatever. But generally, just once you've started to build an audience, make sure that you've got like a mailing list or some kind of social media group to funnel them into, and then ask them like, hey, do you want to be on the review team for my next book? Make sure you try to hold on to those people and get them to leave you good reviews in the future. And note that you can offer them a free copy of the book for review, which they often will disclose. You can't offer them, you know, financial compensation or anything like that. At least I'm pretty sure. I'm not like a lawyer or anything. So that is all my best advice on how to deal with terrible reviews, particularly early on in the publishing process. I hope this was helpful. If any of you watching have any advice on how to deal with bad reviews or any thoughts about like the author-reviewer relationship in general, feel free to drop that in the comments. And if you'd like more from me, I have a Substack and a Patreon, same content on both, and they both have a free tier, or the $5 tier gets you access to my bonus videos, my Discord, and other bonuses. And if you'd like to read any of my mediocrely reviewed books, you can find them in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. I love the idea of this book, but not the execution. All the characters, the dad, the guys, the teachers, and the main character, act and talk like teenage girls. I mean, that might be true. I think my brain is permanently a teenage girl.